Today's webinar is entitled Intrapreneurs, Entrepreneurs Inside Organizations. Our presenter today is Susan Foley, Managing Partner at Corporate Entrepreneurs LLC. Corporate Entrepreneurs LLC is a firm that helps organizations develop corporate entrepreneurship, or intrapreneurship, as a core competency to accelerate new business growth. Susan has spent the last 25 years helping organizations build new businesses that have generated millions. Susan is an international speaker, the author of numerous articles and 2 books, Entrepreneurs Inside and Acceleration, Changing the Speed of Growth. Susan is an RIT alumna, having earned both a BS and an MBA. Susan is on a mission to help individuals and organizations understand why intrapreneurs are needed more than ever in the current economic climate. In doing so, she's awakening the entrepreneurial spirit within all of us. Take it away, Susan.
Thank you, Suzanne. Perhaps you've noticed that we're in the middle of a transformation. We're rethinking what work means to us as individuals, and we're reimagining the role of business. And it is in this transformation that a new type of leader is emerging, the intrapreneur or corporate entrepreneur. And that's what we're going to talk about today. It was a few years ago that I read an article in Business Week that said that 96% of all new business initiatives fail. That year, over $2 trillion was being spent on new initiatives. Well, you can do the math. There was something about that article that kept nagging at me, but the problem was really so huge I couldn't get my arms around it. It wasn't until I turned the question around and said, well, why did 4% succeed? That was actually something more manageable. So my journey actually started when I went to find these individuals working on these new business initiatives. And I actually wound up meeting an extraordinary group of individuals who were building million- and billion-dollar businesses for their organizations. Yet they told me that their organizations did not understand them or even appreciate them for what they did or how they did it. Yet they inspired me with their stories and they encouraged me to write a book because they wanted their organizations to know what it was like to be an entrepreneur inside of an existing organization. What I found is that entrepreneurs are different, they enjoy being different, and they want to make a difference. And today, we're going to look at those differences. But ask yourself, what makes you different? What is your differentiation? Today, what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about what is an entrepreneur and how are they different. We're also going to talk about the entrepreneurial competencies that entrepreneurs need to be successful in that role. And then we're going to look at how do they think, how do they act, and how do they make decisions. And then what we're going to do is look at the results of the RIT alumni who actually participated and took the Intrapreneur scorecard, and we'll see how they ranked and how entrepreneurial they are. Today, what I want to do is throughout the webinar, I will be asking you some questions that I want you to reflect on, and I hope that you answer them honestly. But there's no need for you to send us your answers. We would really like you to just reflect on them for yourself. So let's get started. The first question I'd like you to think about is think about your current role in your company and see if you can relate to the following. Do you ever feel like your organization doesn't get who you are? You frequently see situations at work differently than your peers. Do you ever sit in meetings and not agree with the decisions or not understand what they're really talking about? And do you feel like your ideas aren't being heard? And do you ever wonder if it's time to move on? Well, if you answered yes to any of these, you're not alone and you're not crazy. You might just be an intrapreneur because most intrapreneurs don't feel like they fit inside their organization. So who are these people? Well, intrapreneurs are actually individuals who are inside existing organizations who are building new businesses, products, services, or products that create value or generate new business growth. And when I talk about the intrapreneurs today, I'm not talking about people who are developing product line enhancements or product extensions. but somebody who's creating something new to the market, new to the company, or even leveraging a new technology. When I first started this work, I realized that there was a lack of understanding about who these individuals were and why they were different, or even why it was important. What I had found, however, was that they were often a hidden talent in most organizations. And the reason that they were a hidden talent was the fact that there was no common definition of what made a good entrepreneur. Many times we found that attributes of external entrepreneurs were randomly applied to these people, and there was no consensus in the academic and business world. I've spent most of my career inside organizations building new businesses, products, and services, but it was only a few years ago that I actually knew that there was a term for what I did: corporate entrepreneur, intrapreneur, mavericks, change agents. At HP, they call them positive deviants. It doesn't matter what you call them. These are entrepreneurs inside established organizations. Now, when I first started my work, I actually came across this quote. The first quote, anyway, was very helpful in helping me understand the type of person that I would be looking for. The second quote, however, is more relevant to today, and it represents a new type of entrepreneur, the social entrepreneur. I think the point here is that both quotes highlight the growing importance of entrepreneurs in the new economy. So take a minute to read them. Entrepreneurs are actually individuals who can deal effectively with a rapidly changing and dynamic market. We found that they're usually professionals with education and experience that are very broad and deep. And they've probably done a lot of different things in their careers, had a lot of different opportunities, and that they have the skills and capabilities to identify and exploit opportunities. They're good at creating teams and in creativity and change. And the new entrepreneur, the social entrepreneur, wants to develop innovations that are going to have a social or environmental impact. But if this role is so important, why is it that we know so little about it? The very fact is that a lot of people don't think of themselves in these terms. Many of you listening today probably are entrepreneurs, but never thought of yourself in that way. The good news is that organizations have actually begun to look at the role of entrepreneur and social entrepreneur more seriously. And although they're not fully adopted or integrated into organizations, more and more organizations are beginning to look for these individuals. Now, we all know that innovation is the key to growth. In fact, I would ask all of you, probably 100% of your organizations have innovation in the mission statement. Well, innovation is looked at as the key to growth. And the reason why is that most companies have actually spent the last decade investing in products that were at the end of their life cycle or were fully matured at the time. So the fact is that most organizations now need to look to growth as the new frontier to generate revenue in their organizations. The thing that this study by McKinsey found was that leadership was the key predictor of innovation success. But what was it about leadership? What type of leadership is important? Certainly not traditional leadership, but more entrepreneurial leadership was needed for innovation to be successful. Creativity and innovation, we hear that all the time, being a new competency, but if you can't translate an idea into something that has value or can generate revenue, it's meaningless. People and culture are the most important drivers, but they are also the biggest roadblocks. And despite the importance of innovation, most senior executives do not lead or manage any of these efforts. Only about a third of executives in organizations lead innovation on an ad hoc basis. And because of that, there is a void of leadership when it comes to innovation efforts. Usually when I'm in a classroom, I'll talk about what I'll draw a stickman on the board, because what I realize is that for innovation is really for executives, it's really above the neck. So if you had a stickman in front of you, you'd say, why? Well, the fact is that most executives understand the value of innovation to growth in their company, and they can speak the language, but they're not passionate about it. They don't have it in their gut, and they haven't walked or experienced that for themselves. You have to have your head and your heart connected if you're going to be effective in doing an entrepreneurial initiative inside an organization. To validate the fact that there is, in fact, a lack of entrepreneurial role models in most organizations, I came across this research. And what this research said was that only 4% of executives in large organizations are entrepreneurs or entrepreneurial. Now, what I began to see in my research was the fact that there may be a stronger correlation that people have thought about between talent and growth. Was it just a coincidence that only 4% of executives in large organizations were entrepreneurs and only 4% of new business initiatives succeed? I often wondered about that. The professor who actually did this study told me that the true entrepreneurial leader is rare. In fact, I've seen in other studies that perhaps only 1% of executives in existing organizations are entrepreneurial leaders. And what do we mean by that? What we mean is the fact that these individuals can not only lead in an existing business, but while they can do that at the same time, they're building a new business inside their organization. One of the issues I see is the fact that organizations need to have a better understanding of the difference between managers and leaders, obviously who work in the core business, and the intrapreneurs who are building new businesses inside their organizations. Most organizations have a good handle on what is required in the core business, but less so when it comes to building a new business. They haven't had the experience. Many of the things that are needed in the core business, if you think about it, are just the opposite of what is required to build a new business. I think it's about a 180-degree difference. Some current research that I've been doing with social entrepreneurs said that there's about a 90% difference when it comes to social entrepreneurs because they're more closely aligned with your core business. But the policies, practices, and systems that often support a core business get in the way, and they create barriers to innovation and growth. But what we also found was that there is an experience trap. Think about it. Managers and leaders rely on skills and strategies that worked for them in the past that are no longer effective today. The research shows a different mindset is in order. We had actually conducted some research with large organizations to see how they evaluated ideas. And over 55% of them said that they evaluated ideas through the lens of existing knowledge and past experience. There is no new thinking in that, believe me. It's clear that organizations need a better understanding of the differences between managers and leaders and the intrapreneurs. So what do you think happens when you put somebody from the core business into a new business? They don't do so well because the skill sets and the competencies and the capabilities are about 180 degrees differently. Now, one of the intrapreneurs that I work with told me that she felt like she was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. Intrapreneurs often find themselves in a situation where they seem to be playing a different game with different rules. And when it comes to dealing with the core business, they must stop and shift to the other game. They need to be playing both of those games. They are playing both games simultaneously. It's not that one is better than the other. It's that there are two different ways of playing, and you must approach the situation in a different way. So think about it. You've got two different types of businesses going on. One operates one way, one operates another way. You as the entrepreneur have one foot in both those worlds, and you need to operate effectively in both. So you need to be familiar with how both operate. So since there hadn't been a lot of research in this area, we decided to go ahead and find out really who these people were. In order for us to do our research, we first had to find intrapreneurs. And so, stupid me, we started out by asking senior executives in large organizations if we could talk to their entrepreneurs. All we got were blank stares. They said, we don't have any of them. It actually took us about 6 months to find these individuals, and we worked with them to determine what were the capabilities and competencies that they needed to be effective in their role. We also decided that we had looked at 33 behaviors and 17 competencies. That's what we came up with. We had decided we were going to focus on behaviors versus personalities because we found that behaviors can be more easily changed. But then we needed to find a tool that would help us identify and conduct our research. And when we couldn't find one, like all entrepreneurs, we had to build one. We actually found a vendor who had been developing what they call success profiles for specific job functions. And we worked with this vendor to develop the Corporate Entrepreneur Profile as a tool that would enable us to conduct our research. Interestingly enough, we wound up using the vendor's CEO profile as a baseline for our research. And the reason we did that was because 75% of the behaviors that we had identified for corporate entrepreneurs or intrapreneurs are the same competencies that you need to be a CEO. Think about it. Intrapreneurs need a lot of the same competencies as a CEO. So let me show you what we found. We found that both intrapreneurs and entrepreneurial leaders are, in fact, a distinct group of professionals. After doing this research, we went back to the vendor after 6 years and had them analyze the data, and they validated for us that, in fact, this is a distinct group of individuals. They have a unique combination of competencies that set them apart from more traditional leaders. And when I started my research, I really had a hypothesis that I would find 1 or 2 competencies or behaviors that would distinguish these people from other more traditional managers, and I didn't find that. What I did find was that everybody has these competencies, but it is the depth and the breadth of the competency that distinguishes the intrapreneur from the more traditional leader. So it's a combination of competencies, and it's the depth of the competency. So these individuals are self-reliant. They want the freedom and flexibility to create new and innovative approaches. They like to explore new things, and they deal proactively with ambiguity and the unknown. They're totally engaged in their heads and their hearts, and they're always seeking out the toughest challenges. They want to grow, so they embrace change, and they're willing to take risks and move outside their comfort zone. And they're very effective at managing limited resources. When you work on one of these, you'll find you don't have all the resources you need. And they're focused on getting things done, and they establish challenging goals. On average, interestingly enough, the scores of these intrapreneurs were off the charts. They exhibited superior performance in 15 out of the 17 core competencies that we had looked at. And when we went back to the behavioral assessment vendor, he said that he had never seen scores that high before across a group. And this was a group of individuals across industries and across levels in an organization from director and above. The vendor told us that this was very unusual. It was extraordinary. So we knew we were onto something. We found that being entrepreneurial is actually a set of behaviors and competencies that people can learn. It's the breadth and depth of the competencies that actually distinguish the intrapreneur from others. But we also found was that you can't be an intrapreneur until you are an intrapreneur. It really is all about the experience. Now, once we had a handle on the competencies of intrapreneurs, what we wanted to do was compare the scores of the intrapreneurs to C-level executives. So in this particular case, what we did is we compared the scores of the C-level executives to the intrapreneurs. We meant the CEO, COO, CFO. We were interested in seeing how the C-level executives actually compared to the intrapreneurs. And as you can see, the intrapreneurs actually outscored the C-level executives across the top 6 competencies. But when we looked at all 17 competencies, we found that the intrapreneurs outscored the C-level executives in 10 out of the 17 competencies. What we have seen is the gap represents a number of problems, and the first one is really communication. Because often executives cannot see what intrapreneurs say. Let me repeat that. Often executives cannot see what intrapreneurs say. They don't have that experience base, and besides, they're looking for the data. They can't see what you're saying without supporting data. And if you're building something that has never been done before, you might not have the data. But now that we had the data, we wanted to actually dive deeper and understand more about these individuals. So let's take a look at the top 6 competencies in a little bit more depth. Independent thinking was the first competency, and actually over the years it continues to be the #1 competency. It says that entrepreneurs are not only independent, but they're independent thinkers. They actually make sense of the world based on their own observations and experiences rather than relying on the word of others. They're always asking themselves, is there something I don't know that I should? They're avid learners and avid readers. They respect authority, but they're willing to challenge and question them. They like to try new things. They're not afraid to fail. They're only concerned if they don't try because they learn from both their successes and their failures. They see opportunity in every problem. They are willing to take it on, and they embrace the unknown. They see it as a field of possibilities. You know, experience is important, but experience can get in the way. How many of you have heard, we tried that before, it doesn't work? Or the last person that tried that got fired. Sound familiar? So ask yourself, do you rely on past experience or do you look for opportunities to learn new things? Are you willing to speak up for what you believe and challenge authority? Independent thinkers and entrepreneurs are willing to do that. The second competency was navigating uncertainty. So entrepreneurs are pioneers, they're builders, and they're change agents. They're always blazing a new trail. They're not always the idea generators, however, but they turn those ideas into profitable businesses. They like a blank piece of paper. Give them a blank piece of paper, they love it. If you put them in a box, however, they're going to jump out and they'll leave. These individuals are extremely curious and they're always looking for new things. They're actually quick to see the value in an idea. For some reason, they can look at it from concept through to implementation. They're builders. They love to build things. That's a common thing I continue to see amongst all the entrepreneurs. And they don't let structures get in their way. They're willing to step on toes and break rules to get things done. And they find that a lot of times the existing systems are the biggest obstacles and barriers. And they enjoy finding new ways and developing new systems to make things work. But why is navigating uncertainty so important today? Well, according to an article, Leadership in Crisis, 73% of senior executives said that the ability to deal with ambiguity and uncertainty was the most important attribute dealing with the current economic climate. The third competency was engaged in thriving. These individuals are energized when they're engaged. They actively seek out challenging opportunities. It's what keeps them engaged at work. They are self-motivated, and they're actually very good at motivating other people. They break down barriers. They have a high tolerance for stress, but they don't manage it very well. They're focused on execution and on closure. But I ask you, why is engagement so important? You've probably heard all the studies, the Gallup poll study. Engagement actually represents something far more important than satisfaction and happiness. Towers Perrin has done this study every year looking at engagement in these 4 categories: engaged, enrolled, disenchanted, and disengaged. And today, the Gallup poll also confirms that only 30% of individuals and employees inside organizations are engaged. But what Towers Perrin saw was that over a 3-year period, those organizations with higher levels of engagement actually outperformed other organizations by almost 6 percentage points of operating margin. Now, if you look at the other side of that, what we also saw, or what they saw, was the fact that $370 billion is lost because of disengaged employees. So let me ask you this, where would you see yourself on this chart? And where do you think you would find entrepreneurs? Well, entrepreneurs, obviously you would say engaged, and that's absolutely correct. But what we have found is that entrepreneurs are often in the disenchanted category. They're often the squeaky wheel. They're the person who sits in the meeting and doesn't like talking about how their ideas are different. And so they're not, often their voices and their ideas are not heard. So I think the point here is that we often have to realize that intrapreneurs can be in a different state of mind, and they can be people we're not listening to, and they're the people who are asking why, and sometimes we need to do a better job of listening to them. Driving change. There's actually 3 components to this: challenge, growth, and change. We talked about the fact that intrapreneurs like a challenge, but they like a big challenge. It's kind of like being a mountain climber. It's once you've climbed a mountain, you want to climb one that is much more difficult and challenging the next time. The other thing is that intrapreneurs take responsibility for their own growth and development. They don't wait for the organization to present them with an opportunity. They actively look for those opportunities. They also embrace change. They are willing to be flexible and adaptable. They often become the change that they hope to see, not just driving change, but modeling the change in the behavior to make change happen. So I ask you, do you seek out the toughest challenges that nobody wants? Do you take responsibility for your own growth and development? And do you resist change, or do you drive change? Now, it's interesting in the research because this is one of the key competencies, but we also have a behavior called change. And what we have found is that a lot of individuals in organizations can respond effectively to change, but fewer people are able to effectively drive change. So we actually make a distinction between the two. The next competency was leadership effectiveness, and of course this is a competency that we respect and admire in both the core business but also in new businesses. But I think leadership effectiveness is much more difficult today because of all the uncertainty and the ambiguity that leaders face. And entrepreneurial leaders must deal with all this complexity of starting something new, and they have to look at all the outcomes and the downside of any kind of decision that they might have to make. They also build a commitment toward a common goal, but that means and it requires gaining agreement across stakeholders. They also break down self-imposed barriers. This is a very difficult role for most individuals. And so they have to deal with their own personal barriers, but they also have to work with the people on their team. They need to be able to tear down old systems and build new ones. They have to be flexible. They need to find creative ways to leverage limited resources. In most of these initial efforts, there aren't enough resources to go around, so they have to be extremely creative. They have to, I call it beg, borrow, and steal. But leadership in this context is really all about transformation. It's changing everything that is needed to support the new growth business. And that does require knowing where the organization is flexible and where it's not. And it also requires making unpopular decisions and going across the grain. The last competency is actually execution. And interestingly enough, 3 out of 5 organizations actually rate themselves weak when it comes to execution. You know, execution is not just about delivering something on time and on budget, but it's also about doing what's needed to create business value. And I think that's where a lot of these initiatives fall flat. You also need to leverage individuals that know how to get things done, tear down barriers, and push through organizational obstacles. What I found in the research that there was basically 3 types of intrapreneurs: the creators, or the people who have come up with the ideas. There were more the doers, and then there were more the implementers or the executors who could get it over the end goal. But you need to have flexibility to change course when it's necessary, or kill a project when it doesn't make sense. We actually did more research and asked organizations about if new information came into the organization that would actually say that the product or services they were developing was not effective, what would they do? And 50% of them said that they would continue to go forward even with the new information, which is amazing. Also have to realize that along the way, the target for what you're trying to do is going to shift, because you can't really account for everything that's going to hit you when you're moving down this path. And so I think there has to be that flexibility to move in a different direction. But as the target changed, not everybody's going to continue to understand where you're headed, and so therefore it's extremely important to keep everybody on the same page, because most entrepreneurial efforts actually don't wind up where they initially intended. So most organizations actually fail at execution because they start with structure. Think about it. The last time your organization did a new business initiative, where did they start? They probably put together some new organizational structure. Well, the research shows that organizations that start with structure actually fail. So just something to be aware of. And one of the things you need to think about when you're being an entrepreneur inside an organization is that you're actually living in a world of contrast. Being loyal on one hand and independent, collaborative, competitive, poised and empathetic, tough-minded and intuitive. But this is what makes the difference. It's this ability to coexist in both these worlds that actually sets the entrepreneur apart from others. You've got one foot in both worlds, and you need to have the breadth and depth to understand that it's actually a balancing act. Now, interestingly enough, collaboration was one of the top competencies that we looked at in the study, in the research that we did, and yet collaboration, and you'd think collaboration would be high, it was the lowest scoring competency among all of the entrepreneurs that participated, and even to this day, it continues to be the lowest competency. And the issue is that entrepreneurs have to be a collaborative across the organization, but only to a point. They can't often wait until someone can make a decision. So their competitive nature kicks in. So they're collaborative to a point, but they're extremely collaborative in their team. So it's an interesting thing that we think about collaboration as being a key competency for most individuals today. It may not necessarily be the way that the entrepreneur operates. The next thing I wanted to talk about was entrepreneurial thinking and action. Most entrepreneurs have what we call an entrepreneurial orientation, okay? And I believe that most individuals have the potential to be an entrepreneur or an entrepreneur, but not everyone wants to be one. But we know that entrepreneurship can actually be taught and learned. I think it was Peter Drucker who said about entrepreneurship that it's not magic, it's not mysterious, and it has nothing to do with genes. It's a discipline, and like any discipline, it can be learned. But entrepreneurs must not only think about opportunities, they need to act on them. And the other thing is that most new markets today are highly improbable to identify or predict. And even using all the analytics today does not predict success. The other thing that we see is that the opportunities themselves are often created by the process, the entrepreneurial process itself. It's the interaction across stakeholders where value is created, what we call the co-creation process. So when we think about entrepreneurship, we need to think about it as a way of thinking and behaving, and it's the interplay between thought and action. So let's talk about how entrepreneurs think. Well, we know that they're independent thinkers, but we know that they also think differently. We have found that most entrepreneurs are more whole brain thinkers. They use both sides of their brain, the more analytic and the more creative side of their brain. They take a more holistic or systems view. If they're not a whole brain thinker, we found that they will actually put a team together that is more whole brain thinkers. They're also integrative thinkers. They're able to hold two diametrically opposite concepts in their mind at the same time. And instead of choosing one over the other, they're able to generate a creative solution to form a new idea. And they balance thinking and action. So they experiment, they rethink things and experiment. They don't do all their thinking up front and then experiment. They do the experimentation as part of their learning process. And we've also found that their decision-making processes differently. They process information differently. So let's look at that a little bit. They look at all the possible options before diving into the data too early, and they're often willing to make decisions without sufficient data. In many cases, they aren't going to even have the data. They're good risk managers. And as we talked earlier, they're willing to change direction or even shut a project down when new data becomes available. They also seek to understand complexity, not simplify things too quickly. How many of you try to simplify things quickly because you think that's going to narrow your choices down? Well, entrepreneurs do just the opposite. They don't want to narrow things down too quickly. They want to make sure that they've looked at all the options first. And yet this is just the opposite of what we see in most organizations. And entrepreneurs also are able to look and manage both the short-term and the long-term demands that are upon them. So we have found that entrepreneurs are highly decisive. It's one of the key behaviors, but they do not wait for everything to be perfect before they are willing to make those decisions. Entrepreneurial action, what do we mean by that? Well, there was actually a study done at the University of North Carolina, and they were looking at how successful serial entrepreneurs think and act. And what they found was that entrepreneurs actually define the future by their actions, that they are inherently creative because they see possibilities. They also use iterative planning because they know that things are changing, and as things change, they'll be integrating those into their plans. They embrace surprises because they don't see them as deviations. They think it's a greater opportunity for them to refine their thinking. They'll look at all the options and leverage those that push them further. They take calculated risks. I know that people think of entrepreneurs as being risk takers, but intrapreneurs are calculated risk takers. They look at the upside and the downside of a decision before they make it, what is often called affordable loss. How much are they willing to lose at what cost? They also deal with uncertainty by acting on it, not sitting back and waiting to see what happens. It's often the interplay between thought and action. Now, what is the context for how these individuals operate? Well, we talked about the fact that they want to make a difference, they are different, but they also have a strong belief in what they're doing. In fact, many of these projects take on a life of their own, and the individuals often create a common bond that lasts long after the project is over. Entrepreneurs will also do whatever it takes to get things done. We talked about the fact that they're willing to step on toes and break rules, but they're also willing to put their job on the line. They're willing to be fired. Most entrepreneurs are not climbing the corporate ladder. They are there to learn and grow. They know they're going to have to break rules, and they're willing to put their job on the line. Entrepreneurs also recognize that the value is in the experience itself. So win or lose, they learn and grow from that experience. And despite what many organizations think that these people are not as loyal, entrepreneurs are loyal to the project first and then the company, but they're loyal employees. Think about it. How many employees do you know that are willing to put their job on the line for their company? The other thing that we have to keep in mind is that entrepreneurs will run up against a host of barriers. Some are obvious and many are hidden, but everything is a potential barrier. But entrepreneurs are creating something new. They're creating something that has never been done before. There are often no roadmaps or guidebooks for them to follow. They're creating a new path. They're going to encounter obstacles that the organization has not encountered before, and they're going to have to make decisions and do what it takes to get from strategy to execution. But along the way, any of these things can potentially hit them, things that would impede their progress, like shifting priorities or budgeting systems that don't support what they're doing, or long approval processes, or cultures we don't do it that way. And what we found is that people are often more interested in seeing the project fail than succeed. Because it succeeds, then those individuals will have to change. So far, I've been able to identify over 90 potential barriers. Now, I can't just give you a list of barriers and say, here are the barriers you're going to run up against, because every organization is different. You're going to not know what barriers you're going to encounter until you encounter them. And it's how you deal with those barriers that distinguishes the entrepreneur from somebody who is more traditional. The realization is today that we are all entrepreneurs, that the old paradigm of climb the career ladder is gone, There's a new concept called career pathing. So if your organizations are doing that, that's great. Organizations are allowing individuals to define what they want in a career path. So we all need to think like entrepreneurs. I think that companies want individuals that can invent, adapt, and reinvent themselves. So innovation is key. I think in the future we're going to see workers who will find themselves creating their own jobs inside organizations. They'll be free agents, moving in and out of organizations and moving between organizations. I think that once organizations start actively identifying these individuals, I think we're going to find more of them. I believe there are more of them. I just don't think organizations have actually been seriously looking for them. The more that I work with entrepreneurs, the more that what I've come to see is that what really makes them different is that they are in alignment with who they are, not what the organization wants them to be. And in being true to themselves, they are more energized, more engaged, more productive, and they are better employees. Now what I'd like to do is go through the results of the Intrapreneur Scorecard, because what the scorecard does kind of encapsulates everything we've just talked about. The Intrapreneur Scorecard is actually a high-level self-assessment that looks at your entrepreneurial orientation. The results actually show if your approach to work is more entrepreneurial or traditional, or is it a little of both. So what it does is it looks at the top 6 competencies that we just talked about, and then it also asks you to rate yourself on those same 6 competencies. We also look at entrepreneurial attributes, your thinking process, how you process information, how you make decisions, and how do you take action. And we also look at your preferred thinking style. You're more right brain or left brain or whole brain. I know that some of you have took the Intrapreneur Scorecard before the webinar, and I thank you for doing that, and I will share the results with you. I'll send those to you. But today, I just want to go through at a high level some of the results that we saw from the scorecard. Now, keep in mind that this is a high-level self-assessment. If you wanted a more detailed analysis, you'd have to look at the Corporate Entrepreneur Profile. So what we first found was that this is a small sample, but it was interesting to find that 59% of the RIT alumni who did participate are intrapreneurial and 40% were more traditional. Now, when we looked at the leadership competencies, which was interesting, we found that as far as thinking, that actually 70% of the participants were more traditional in their thinking, which means that they use much more logic, reason, and argument in their thinking, as opposed to being more independent in their thinking and relying on their own experience and gut. So that was an interesting insight here. Navigating uncertainty, obviously they were much more entrepreneurial. And I think the other interesting one here was engaged and thriving. So it was a little bit of both, being both entrepreneurial and traditional. And the way we interpret that is the fact that engaged and thriving is really about individuals who are picking challenging goals and opportunities. That's how they keep engaged. And what this is saying is that probably you're playing it a little safer and you're identifying goals that you know that you can achieve. And then, of course, driving change was very strong, which says that a lot of you believe that you can actually be effective in making the change happen inside your organization. And then again, leadership effectiveness and execution was entrepreneurial. We also looked at your preferred thinking style, and it's interesting we had a split here between right brain, whole brain, and left brain, but the RIT participants obviously were more left brain thinkers when it came to this analysis. But why is that important? Well, it's important to use both sides of the brain. We talked about the fact that intrapreneurs are much more whole brain thinkers, but you need to have both sides operating simultaneously. Obviously, when you're generating ideas, you want to be more right brain, but obviously when you're analyzing those ideas, you want to be more left brain. And as we said, many are whole brain thinkers. So it doesn't matter where you are on the spectrum of preferred thinking style. I think it's just important that when you're putting a team together that you want to have more of a whole brain team. When it came to level of engagement, it was split across, evenly across, and I think this is kind of in alignment with the studies from Gallup and Towers Perrin that say only about 30% of employees in today's organization are engaged. The last thing we looked at was what we call intrapreneurial attributes. So do you have an entrepreneurial mindset or a more traditional mindset? And your thinking methods and decision-making. So it's interesting, what we saw was that your thinking and your decision-making and your mindset were intrapreneurial, but when it came to taking action, the participants were more traditional. And as we had talked about earlier, it's not just being able to be entrepreneurial in your thinking. It really means that you need to take that thinking and put it into action. And one of the reasons I think that taking action was traditional is if you look at the intrapreneurial influences, it said they were both traditional and intrapreneurial. These are the things that actually drive people to be entrepreneurial in their action: self-esteem, depth and breadth of knowledge, tolerance of failure, risk propensity, and motivation. So this kind of explains the fact that taking action is traditional. But these are the influences that enable people or make people feel comfortable in taking action. So that's all I have today. I really want to thank you for letting me share my experience and my journey with you today. Being an entrepreneur, I've done it all my career, is probably one of the most exciting and rewarding things that you can do. But I also have to tell you that it's one of the most difficult and frustrating things that you can do. But when you do it, you learn a lot about yourself, you learn a lot about the company, and your company learns a lot. So you're actually moving your company forward into the future. Now, for any of you who might want to find out more information, you can get a free excerpt of a chapter in my book, The Acceleration. You can find that on my website. And if you're more interested in social entrepreneurs, you can download a free report, our Social Entrepreneurs DNA report. So I want to thank you, and I want to wish you luck on your journey. And now I will turn it over to Suzanne.
Thank you, Susan. That was really interesting. Do we have any questions from the audience today? I don't see any, so if you do have a question, feel free to type it in the box. I will start. I have a question for you, Susan. How does someone in a corporation early in their career, you talk about taking action, right? So I'm early in my career, I might have all those other attributes, but I'm not in a position, right, of any kind of leadership to do anything. I mean, did you do any research about how one takes action in an organization, even though, despite the fact that, they have all the great ideas, but they just don't know how to get it done within the current structure?
That's a good question, and I think the real issue is that you need to think about experimenting with things, trying new things. I think that's how people begin to develop the skills and competencies and the confidence. If you just start trying different things, experiment with little things that are not going to be disruptive to the organization. I think that's the best way to start taking action. I think we have a tendency when we go through some of our educational programs to be thinking analytically, and planning everything out. And I think it's more about experimenting, try things, ask why. I think that's what I suggest to young people who are starting out.
Okay. Anybody have any other questions? Okay, I'll ask one more. In the beginning, you said you looked at behaviors and not personality. Is there a time when you have overlaid behaviors and personality? So now that you know what the behaviors of a entrepreneur are, can you identify a certain personality based on that, or not?
No, it's a good question, and I actually haven't done that, but there has been extensive research done in the field of corporate entrepreneurship / intrapreneurship, where they looked at personality, and I think some of you may be familiar with the Big Five personality concept. And what they found was that they could not find a correlation between the personality and being entrepreneurial. Now, in defense of that, they did say that they thought that the definitions of those Big Five were too high level. And so when I talked to the researchers who did that, they felt that if we went down deeper into the behaviors, that we would probably see something, and that's where my research continues.
Great. And I have one last question. You Okay. I'm reading a question from one of the participants. Susan, did you ever work in a skunk works? It says, let me just say, this Intra is not new, as you mentioned. Companies did not have the detail you laid out. Skunk work was developed many years ago. Do you have research on this?
I don't. I mean, Skunk Works obviously I think was a forerunner of all this. A lot of people, I wasn't in a Skunk Works, but I have always been developing new business and products. And some of them actually I had to do under the radar, and I think that's a little bit more like Skunk Works. But no, I haven't really done anything or looked at that aspect of it. I think it's similar.
Okay. In today's business world, there is too much risk of losing your job if you go outside the norm and experiment. Do you have any comments on that?
Stephen, that's a great question, because I think what we're finding is that given the current economic climate, a lot of people have their heads down. And I think once the economy changes, it's going to happen, people are going to change. But the true entrepreneur finds opportunity and is willing to risk their job. Now, I know a lot of you can't do that, so I wouldn't suggest it. But I do think that a lot of people are willing to say, hey, look, this is not working for me. I need to do something differently. So that's why they start flexing their own muscles inside an organization. So I think, the other thing that entrepreneurs ask me is, when is it time to go? And I say, it's only time to go when you know you've tried everything that you possibly can and that you know that the organization is not responding to you. Because remember, only a few organizations, although politically they want to do this, they're only now beginning to take it seriously. So I hope that answered the question.
Great. And Barbara asked, how can I market myself as an entrepreneur within my company?
That's a great question, and I think what I have found is that you actually have to earn the right to be an entrepreneur inside an organization. And what do I mean by that? You have to have some successes, because when you have successes inside an organization, then you get more, responsibility, and you can flex your muscles a little bit more. So I do think that you have to have a few wins, and they don't have to be gigantic wins. They have to be even some small wins where you earn the right to become an entrepreneur.
Okay, and then the next one from Carol is, does it take a certain amount of physical energy, very high energy, to be an entrepreneur?
Yes, actually, energy is one of the behaviors, vitality, and it's amazing how high level of energy that these individuals have. It's a very stressful position inside an organization, because you're working against the grain, and you're working against a whole lot of forces inside an organization. So having a lot of stamina and energy is really important, or knowing how to manage your stress, because a lot of them are really workaholics, and they have a high tolerance for stress, but they don't manage it very well. So that's a great question.
And from Patricia, have you identified educational curriculums which create or increase the entrepreneurial skills?
Well, there are a number of organizations. It's the Aspen Institute, the Fellows Program. I think they do a great job of doing that. Ashoka is another organization. I'm currently working with the League of Intrapreneurs. You should look at them and see what kinds of things they're doing. I also I'm familiar with some curriculum because I teach corporate entrepreneurship at Babson College. I think those don't go far enough in helping develop the competencies and behaviors. They talk about the process, the entrepreneurial process, how do you do it, et cetera. They don't work with the individuals, and that's kind of where my focus has been, on helping the individual become more self-aware and understand their strengths and weaknesses.
Great. And then Tom says, you do any benchmarking with GE in their development from Skunk Works to today's new structure?
I have not, no, but I'd love to do that.
Okay, and from Barbara, if my company isn't into this kind of workflow, how can I market myself as an entrepreneur outside of my company?
That's a good one. I think it's interesting is that we're still in this gray area where I think, you know, people ask me, should I put intrapreneur or corporate entrepreneur on my resume, and I don't think so. I think it's really, you know, being a growth leader or having an opportunity in your existing organization to grow things, that's what's going to attract other organizations to you. It's the building aspects, it's the, you know, navigating uncertainty. It's those kinds of things that people are looking for today. So that's the way I position myself.
And from Patricia, is there any research on the brain of entrepreneurs?
No, that's a great question because I started giving some of the people that took my corporate entrepreneur profile the Herman Brain Dominance Instrument because I began to see that they were more whole brain thinkers. So I haven't seen any research. I certainly would love to check it out because I think it would be interesting to see that.
Okay, and a comment from Fred. I was vice president of a Kodak venture company. The business plan was not in correlation with the product that failed. Okay.
I'm not sure what that means. Does that mean that the original product turned into something else, or the product that turned out failed?
Right.
Not about that.
Tom wants to know if Babson's still tied into GE with the leadership initiatives.
You know, I don't know for sure. That would be in the Babson Executive Education. I'm not sure about that, how recent that was.
Okay. And then from Stephen, do the major consulting firms favor intrapreneurs?
Yes, that's a good question, too. Stephen, they have done a lot of research in that area. I think it's Ernst & Young, and if they're the ones still around. And there's a couple that have actually done it, done studies and research studies on it. I think, in all fairness to them, I think they're still just at the beginning of that process. But I think all of them see it as a major business opportunity for a consulting firm.
Okay, great. So that's all the time we have for Q&A. Additional questions can be emailed to RITalum, that's RITALUM, @rit.edu, or tweeted to @RIT_alumni with the hashtag #MeRITWebinars.